They don't whip themselves with chains until they bleed. They don't have any of the other strange practices that are mentioned in there. Don't treat women as slaves. And above all, they never gave $1 billion to the Vatican Bank or anybody else.
Well, speaking of that, one of the things I'd like to know is why does the Vatican have its own bank?
You won't be surprised to hear that before the introduction of the euro, an Italian bank was not always the safest place to put your money. So if you were the Vatican and you had to have the funds to administer the business of the church, starting your own bank made a great deal of sense. The other thing to remember is that Vatican City is legally an independent country, and other small European countries like Monaco and Liechtenstein have their own banks, so it's really not unusual.
Well, let's go back to the idea that Mary Magdalene and the ideas of the sacred feminine, which both figure prominently into the Da Vinci Code. Did the early church label Mary Magdalene as a prostitute in order to discredit her?
Actually, the church never officially said that about Mary Magdalene. It's a peculiarity in the scriptures that in the Gospel of Luke, there's a story of a woman who comes to Jesus, falls at his feet, washes his feet with her tears, dries them with her hair, and she had been involved in some sort of immorality, supposedly prostitution. Mary Magdalene appears in the gospel right after that story. So sometime in the Middle Ages, Mary Magdalene got identified with that woman, although it's not explicit in the scriptures. And I think it's just a matter of people seem to have a psychological need to have a patron saint of fallen women. The fact is that in the 1960s, the Catholic Church actually came out with an official statement that no, Mary Magdalene wasn't really a nice girl.
Well, why did Christianity reject goddess worship?
Well, it wasn't just Christianity. It actually goes back to Old Testament times. But let me back up just a little bit here, that in the Da Vinci Code, the people talk about goddess worship and nature worship as if it was the same thing as Gnosticism. Remember that the Gnostics considered the material world and nature to be bad, and for their high-level people that they said were in their last life, they forbid those people to have sex. So they're a very different group of people than are described when we get to one of the things that the Hebrew prophets long ago did not like about Earth Mother cults is ritual religious sex. For example, a farmer might plant a crop, and then to ensure the fertility of his crop, he'd go to the temple and have sex with a priestess who represented the Earth Mother, and of course he'd pay for that. So the Hebrew prophets condemned that as simple immorality, and Christianity took up where they left off. There's another aspect of nature worship, which is true of all nature worship cults from the ancient Near East all the way to the ancient Aztecs. There's a lot of human sacrifice, and again, the ancient Hebrews didn't go for that, and Christianity, again, took up where they left off.
Well, didn't the early Christians actually refer to the old gods and goddesses as demons?
It's interesting that even some of the ancient Romans commented that the gods in their mythology did some pretty awful things, murder, incest, everything. And if you believe that there really were supernatural beings who did things like that, then demons would probably be a good thing to call them.
So did Christianity suppress the sacred feminine?
Again, I find the concept kind of silly. Look around the world, every Catholic church on earth has a statue of Mary in it. Go down to Mexico City, there's a great big relic of Our Lady of Guadalupe in the middle of town. There wasn't a matter of actually having to suppress that. As I said, with the human sacrifice was a result of fear of crop failure. I think a lot of people, especially in the time between the fall of the Roman Empire and the early Middle Ages, the tribes that accepted Christianity voluntarily did so because it made the world less scary than what they'd done before.
Well, hasn't the Catholic Church actually killed people in order to stop them from spreading certain beliefs?
This is true, Rachel. In the bad old days of the Inquisition, people were killed for spreading false beliefs. I'd like to emphasize that the idea here was that by spreading false beliefs, they were causing other people to go to hell, which is why they're given the death penalty. But when this happened, at least the charge was made public, that the people who condemned them in the church said, this is what this person taught, this is wrong, don't you believe it either. It was never a question of trying to cover something up.
Well, you said that there was the Priory of Zion for Leonardo da Vinci, or there was no Priory of Zion, actually, for him to be Grand Master of. Even so, didn't Leonardo da Vinci actually paint Mary Magdalene by Jesus' side in the Last Supper?
Well, if we have a look at the Last Supper as da Vinci painted it, there's this gap over to the right side of Jesus, and the next figure in the painting is kind of leaning over, almost looks like they're going to sleep. this character looks rather effeminate to our modern eyes. But the character that's being portrayed is John, the youngest disciple. The youngest disciple, as we're told in the Gospels, was John. And so the artist drew him without a beard. And of course, all these people have long hair. So with that and the Renaissance style of painting young men as looking to us rather pale and effeminate, it looks rather like a woman to us, but no, that's supposed to be a young man.
Well, we're about to the end of our time, but before we leave, I do want to just know, is there anything else that, we can learn from the novel?
I've heard that as a result of the sales of the Da Vinci Code, that there are a lot of people going to see the art treasures in the Louvre and many of the architectural monuments that Dan describes as his characters travel around Europe, and I think that's certainly a good thing. What I'd like to see happen is that in addition to looking at the Gnostic Gospels that are mentioned or some of the Earth Mother religions that are mentioned, I think what I'd really like to see is maybe people go to places like ccel.org and look at what the mainstream Orthodox Christians had to say in the beginning, and maybe they'll get a good idea of why it is that those ideas, that kind of Christianity, won out and the other faded away.
Well, in conclusion, can you just kind of summarize some of the points that we've gone over during our program now?
Goodness, I filled my copy of the Da Vinci Code with red ink over all the things that I found that were questionable or I felt were just plain wrong. But start out, again, people like Da Vinci were not part of some secret organization. It was proven 20 years ago that secret organization didn't exist. That was a fraud. The Gnostics, again, were a movement in the Greek-speaking world descended from the Greek philosophers who picked up on Jesus as a figure to spread their message. They were mainly concerned with reincarnation, and they believed that matter was evil, as opposed to the Jews who believed that if they had another life, it was the resurrection of the body and very material. And the Gnostic religion and the goddess worship with sexual rituals and priestesses and so forth were two completely different movements. They're identified in the book. They didn't have anything to do with each other. And that we have lots of documentation of people with our version of Christianity and Jesus being divine back to the year 110 in writing that scholars agree to be authentic.
Well, I know that we could probably have a much longer program than we do now. There's so much material to cover, and I wish that we could actually stay with you longer and discuss this a little bit more. We certainly appreciate you sharing your insights with us about this extremely controversial book, and we appreciate you taking the time to come here and speak with us about it. I also want to thank our viewers. We're grateful that you tuned in and hoped you gained some valuable information from our program. We do encourage you to do some investigating on your own so that you too can separate fact from fiction. We hope to see you next time on We're History.